Many years ago, on the far edge of explored space, there was a small human outpost built not for battle or politics, but for research and quiet observation. It stood between rough asteroid belts and fading stars, a place where few ships passed and fewer stayed for long among the engineers and scientists working. There was a young man named Eli. He was not a soldier or a leader. He was just someone who fixed things, kept machines alive and systems running smoothly, but he always had a curious mind and a kind heart that others often overlooked. The days were quiet until one afternoon, the silence of space was broken by a loud alarm. The sky above the outpost lit up with fire and falling debris. The radar picked up a damaged ship spinning out of control and heading straight toward the rocky plain near the outpost. Without waiting for orders, Eli grabbed his gear, jumped into a rover, and sped toward the crash site. Dust and smoke filled the air as he arrived. The wreckage was twisted and burning metal, but somehow he heard movement inside. Someone was alive and calling for help in a voice filled with fear and pain. Without fear for his own safety, Eli climbed into the broken vessel, the heat and sparks making every movement dangerous. And there in the corner of the ship was a small alien girl with silver markings on her skin and eyes. Wide with panic, her leg was bleeding and her breathing was weak. She looked no older than 10, maybe younger. Her clothes were torn, but her presence had a strange sense of importance, like she did not belong to an ordinary crew, ignoring every regulation and every warning about unknown species. Eli gently lifted her into his arms and carried her back to the rover. Back at the outpost, his fellow engineers hesitated. They had protocols and procedures, and the alien girl was not in the database. They feared infection or danger, but Eli stayed beside her, cleaning her wounds, giving her water, speaking softly, though she likely did not understand a word he said. Through the long night he remained with her, watching over her, as if she were family, not a stranger from another world. Finally, when the sun rose, a group of unfamiliar ships appeared in the sky, fast, sleek, and glowing with advanced energy. The outpost was suddenly surrounded, and a team of tall figures stepped out wearing robes that shimmered in the light. They said little, but their eyes locked onto the girl and softened with what looked like relief. They spoke to her in their language, and her face changed from fear to calm, as if she recognized them. Before they took her away, the girl turned to Eli. She limped forward, held his hand, and in quiet, broken English, she said, "I remember you." Then she was gone, taken into the sky, with the silent ships leaving behind only the mystery of who she truly was and why she had been alone in space. Humans at the outpost returned to their duties, and the story faded from official records. But Eli never forgot the look in her eyes, the warmth of her tiny hand, the sound of her voice. When she said those 4 words, he never learned her name and never asked for anything in return. He only hoped that somewhere out there the girl he had saved was safe, and that maybe one day she would remember the human who gave her a second chance. That memory stayed with him as years passed and life moved on, but deep inside, a quiet part of him waited and wondered what became of her, and if the stars would ever bring them together again. Many years had passed since that day when Eli had saved the mysterious alien girl from the wreck and returned to his quiet life on the edge of space. He never told the full story to anyone outside the outpost, and even there, people soon stopped asking questions. The memory of the silver-eyed child became a silent part of him, something he carried in his thoughts like an old photograph tucked inside the heart. As time moved forward, Eli grew older, his hair turned gray, and his hands became slower. But his eyes still searched the stars each night, wondering if the past had truly ended, or if it had just gone silent for a while. Far away across the galaxies, the world had changed. New alliances were born between species, trade and language began to blend, and yet distrust still remained between powerful alien empires and humanity, though peace was spoken by officials. Many feared war waited behind smiles and treaties. Earth had grown stronger, but it was still not fully accepted into the ancient circles of the stars. Many humans believed that respect could not be earned by technology alone, but by something deeper, something rare, something true. One morning, as the skies over Earth remained clear, A massive signal interrupted every channel across the planet's space stations, picked up strange readings, and orbital defense systems lit up like fire across the atmosphere. People looked upward as the clouds opened, and what they saw would never be forgotten. The royal fleet had arrived. Not just one ship, but dozens, each one shining with deep violet and golden armor, their designs nothing like human. Crafts glowing with energy that danced like light on water. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. The people on the ground did not know whether to feel honored or afraid. The ships did not attack. They simply held position around Earth, like watchful guardians, and then a single voice echoed across every transmission in every language. The voice was clear, strong, and filled with elegance. It was a woman's voice, and she spoke not as a conqueror, but as a guest requesting a moment with the humans. She declared herself not with titles of war, but with one of peace, she said. She had returned after many years, and she sought the man who once saved her in a time of fire and fear. She said his name was Eli, and she would speak to no one else until he stood before her. The world fell into confusion. Governments called emergency meetings. Leaders demanded answers. Historians searched old files and outpost logs. Satellites scanned for signs of deception, but the message never changed. The fleet remained calm, unmoving, and patient, as if time itself had slowed. Eli, who now lived in a small cabin near the northern forest, had no idea his name was being whispered in every corner of the world. He was tending his garden when the officials arrived, not with weapons, but with requests. They brought him to the capital in a quiet transport, not forcing him, but asking with great care. He sat in silence as the cities rushed outside his window, wondering how the past had returned in such a strange and powerful form. When he arrived at the great hall prepared for alien visitors, the air inside was thick with tension. Soldiers lined the walls, media drones hovered in the corners, and translators stood, ready to understand every word. And then the doors opened, and she entered. Her presence was unlike anything they had seen. Tall, graceful, glowing slightly with a natural light in her eyes and on her skin. She wore a cloak of colors that shifted like living stars, and her crown pulsed with soft silver energy. She walked slowly through the hall, her steps smooth, her face calm, her gaze never leaving Eli. And when she reached him, she paused, took a deep breath, and then she did something that made the entire room fall silent. She bent her knees, lowered her head, and touched her hand to the floor before him. A gesture of the highest respect in her culture, a gesture not given even to kings or warriors, but to those who had changed destiny without seeking reward. She looked up at him, her voice soft and steady, and said, "Do you remember me?" And in that moment, Eli felt the years melt away. He saw the frightened girl in the wrecked ship, the small hand holding his, the broken English whispering, "I remember you," and now here. She was no longer a child, no longer lost, but a princess standing before him, not to demand, not to warn, but to honor the quiet human who had once saved her without needing to know who she was, and without ever asking for anything in return. The great hall was silent as the alien princess stood before Ailey, her voice still gentle, her eyes steady, yet filled with something powerful that words alone could not carry. She had traveled across the stars, through borders, and across ages, not as a ruler seeking power, but as a soul carrying a memory from a moment long buried in time. The people gathered around did not know how to react. Some leaned forward, others froze where they stood, and even the translators were unsure whether they should speak or remain still, because in that moment language felt smaller than the feeling that filled the room. Eli, who had lived most of his life without attention, now stood under the gaze of thousands, and yet his heart was not racing with fear. Instead it beat slowly, filled with the warmth of something long forgotten. He looked into her eyes and saw not only the young girl he once saved, but also the weight of years that had shaped her into someone stronger, someone noble, someone who had not let the kindness of a stranger fade with the passing of time. She took a step closer, and her voice grew clearer as she began to speak again, this time not just to him, but to all those who were watching from every screen, every corner of the world. She Told the story not from history books, but from memory, the moment when her ship had been attacked, the moment when her people had scattered, and how she had been alone and broken on a strange world. She spoke of the fear she felt and the pain that blinded her, and how in that darkness, a human hand reached into the flames and pulled her to safety. A hand that did not ask who she was, did not wait for orders, and did not care about rules or risk. She spoke of how he had tended to her wounds, stayed beside her through the night, and treated her not like an alien, not like a burden, but like someone who mattered. As she spoke, Eli listened without interrupting, his hands calm at his sides, his eyes not moving from hers. The room remained frozen, not from fear, but from something stronger, something rare, because the truth behind her words was not just about him, it was about what it meant to be human. She said that from that day forward, she never forgot the feeling of being saved, not for power, not for reward, but for nothing more than the simple belief that life deserved to be protected. She said that moment became the center of her path, the root of her leadership, and the light that guided her through years of conflict and doubt. She paused then, and her next words echoed deeper than before. She said she had come not to repay a debt, because kindness should never be weighed like currency. She had come to declare before the human world, and all who watched beyond it, that humanity had shown something sacred in the act of one man, and that sacred thing had changed her empire, had shifted the way her people saw Earth, and had opened doors that once seemed forever closed. She raised her voice and said that trust is not born from strength, but from the moments where compassion overcomes fear and action is taken not for glory, but for good. Around the hall, eyes began to soften. Even those who had come with doubts felt something stir in their chests, because this was not politics, and this was not strategy. This was a story about one person changing the future through a choice made with heart rather than calculation. The princess turned to Eli once more and said that she had built temples of peace across her world, and in the center of the largest one, there was a symbol not of her rule, but of his courage. She said that she had told her people of the human who did not see her as other, who did not hesitate to offer hope when all seemed lost. She stepped back then and raised her hand, and a small sphere of light floated into the air above her. It shimmered and slowly expanded until it displayed a vision of her homeworld, a temple rising from crystal ground, with open gates and thousands gathered around a statue carved in the shape of a human. Not armed, not armored, but reaching out with open hands, a figure that looked like Eli, though simplified and made with grace and love. The people watching the vision were silent, and some wept without knowing why, because something in the image touched a place inside them that words often could not reach. And then she said something that would be remembered for generations. She looked toward the leaders of Earth and toward the people who had built their world through struggle and dream, and she said one man with no army, no title, and no mission had changed them path of two civilizations through a single act of courage and kindness. She said she did not come here to ask for alliance, she came to offer it, without conditions and without demands, in honor of the human spirit that had once saved her and still lived in the quiet soul of the man who stood before her now. Vision slowly faded from the air above the princess, and the hall remained wrapped in silence. Not a whisper rose, not a foot moved, as if the hearts of all present had forgotten how to beat for a moment, as if time itself had paused to understand the meaning of what had just happened. And in that heavy silence, the princess stood tall, her hands clasped at her waist, her eyes not seeking applause or praise, but simply waiting for the weight of her words to settle across those who had listened. Her message had not been wrapped in diplomacy or layered in strategy. It had come from a place deeper than politics. It had come from truth and memory and something older than treaties, something that could not be measured in numbers or signed with ink. Then, slowly, movement returned, heads began to turn, breaths were taken, and soft murmurs rippled across the room, but they did not carry doubt, they carried wonder as people tried to absorb what they had just seen and heard. Eli stood still, his expression unreadable yet calm, as if he too was trying to understand how a single act he barely remembered in detail had traveled so far through the stars and through time. To return to him in such a powerful form, he did not speak, he did not step forward, he simply looked at the princes and nodded once. And in that small nod, there was more meaning than speeches could ever hold. The princes turned toward the leaders of Earth, toward the diplomats and envoys who had come prepared for complex discussions and cautious negotiations. She addressed them not with superiority, but with respect and openness. She explained that her world had watched humanity grow with both curiosity and concern. They had seen the wars and the wonders, the struggles and the spirit, and for years they had remained distant, unsure if humans would rise with wisdom or fall with greed. But the moment Eli had saved her had been the first sign that kindness without condition existed within the human soul, and that one moment had opened a door through which understanding could finally walk. She declared that she had come with more than gratitude. She had come with a gift, one that no other species had ever received. She offered Earth full recognition within the interstellar council, a place among the ancient empires, not as a child to be guided, but as an equal to be heard. She offered technological exchange, access to knowledge, lost to time, medical advancements that could cure diseases that still haunted human lives, and energy solutions that would end scarcity, not as a reward, but as a beginning, a step toward shared destiny. Gasps rose across the hall as the meaning of her words became clear, and even the most skeptical among the leaders could not hide their astonishment. This was no ordinary treaty. This was history bending in real time. This was an empire built over centuries, bowing in friendship to a world still taking its first real steps among the stars, and all because one man had chosen to help a stranger without knowing who she was or what she might become. The media tried to capture every second, every angle of the moment, but even the best cameras could not fully contain the emotion that flowed through the chamber. The princess raised her hand once more and said that the story of her rescue would be taught across her worlds, not as a tale of royalty or survival, but as a lesson that peace begins with choice, and that the most powerful change often starts with those who never seek credit. She said that Ailey was not her hero alone, but a symbol of the good that lives in all people when fear is set aside and kindness is allowed to lead. She said that humanity had often looked to the stars with wonder, but now the stars were looking back with hope. Eli finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. He said he never expected thanks and never thought that what he did would matter beyond that moment. He said he was just someone who saw another life in need and did what felt right, and that if the same moment came again, he would do the same without hesitation or thought of what might come afterward. The princess nodded with deep understanding and said that is what made his actions powerful. That is what made him unforgettable, and that is why her people trusted his kind. Then she walked toward the center of the hall and placed a small orb on the ground. It opened slowly like a flower blooming in sunlight, and from it emerged a glowing pattern that floated in the air, forming a seal of unity. A bond not signed by pressure or war, but by choice and respect, and that symbol burned gently in the air as the first shared agreement between Earth and her world formed in peace and in memory across Earth. People watched the broadcast in homes and schools, in offices and stations, and though they came from different lives and spoke different tongues, the feeling was the same across all hearts. Something had changed, something deep and lasting, and it had come not from force, but from a quiet truth that one act of kindness can ripple across galaxies and return one day, not as a whisper, but as a voice strong enough to change the fate of worlds. The stars above Earth no longer looked the same after that day. Their light now carried new meaning for millions who had watched history unfold with wide eyes and open hearts. The story of a simple man saving an alien girl had traveled beyond borders and beyond species. It had become a living truth, stronger than politics and more lasting than any title could ever be. Ailey returned to his quiet home in the northern woods, not with soldiers or banners, but with silence and peace. The same way he had lived before, the same way he chose to live again. He asked for no reward, he refused wealth, and turned away from the spotlight. His heart did not seek fame, His hands still planted trees and repaired machines, and his evenings were still spent under the sky watching the stars drift slowly across the black ocean of space. The world had already changed, and it could not return to what it was before the message brought by the princess continued to echo across every land and every language. Children in distant countries now learned about the man named Eli, whose kindness opened the stars for humanity. Books were written, statues were built, and murals painted with images of a man lifting a wounded alien child from fire and chaos. Some called him a hero, others called him a symbol, but to those who truly listened, he remained something simpler and more powerful. He was a reminder that one life can make a difference when guided by compassion rather than fear. The alliance between Earth and the alien empire grew stronger with time. Scientists shared knowledge, healers exchanged cures, and engineers worked side by side building machines that once lived only in dreams. But even as technology rose and cities became brighter, people often returned to the core of the story, the moment when a human with no command and no weapon chose to help someone who had no voice and no name in his world at the time. It became the root of trust and the bridge between two distant hearts. Eli often received letters and gifts sent from children across planets. Some wrote poems, others drew pictures, and one little girl from a moon colony sent him a stone shaped like a heart with the words written in soft ink, "Thank you for showing us what good looks like." He kept that stone beside his window, where it caught the morning light and reflected small beams across the walls of his home, like tiny stars dancing just for him. He never responded with long messages. He simply smiled and whispered, "May you carry the kindness forward." Princes visited him once again, not with guards or ceremony, but alone, wearing a simple cloak and carrying no symbols of power. They sat beneath the old trees where wind moved through leaves, and the world felt quiet again, like it did many years ago when things were simpler. She thanked him not with words, but with presence. They spoke for hours, not about politics or history, but about life, about dreams, about the sound of water flowing through mountains and the joy of seeing someone smile without reason. Before she left, she placed her hand over his heart and said, "You did not save a girl that day, you saved a future, and that future will always remember you." And as time passed and generations came and went, the name of Eli remained, not as a myth, not as a legend beyond reach, but as a truth that lived inside every human who believed that even the smallest action born from love could shape the sky above them. People continued to look upward, but now they looked not with fear or ambition, but with gratitude and wonder, for they knew that once a man reached into fire and lifted someone who was different, and by doing so lit the path for all who would come after. And so the stars watched over Earth, and Earth watched back, and in the quiet cabin beneath the night sky, where one man once chose kindness over comfort, a gentle light flickered through the window, a light that had come from a place far away and now belonged to everyone forever, a light that would never fade. The end.